Attorneys for the Las Vegas Review-Journal have recently argued in court that Metro should be sanctioned for their review of the contents of slain reporter Jeff Garriman's phone, computers, and external hard drives. Now, this comes after months of litigation by the Review-Journal to prevent the police from reviewing what they argue is protected, confidential information relating to Garriman's sources through his years as a reporter. The Review-Journal argues that police reviewing the contents of Garriman's phone would violate Nevada's Shiled law protection that journalists' sources are enjoying. Now, what is Nevada's Shiled law, and how does it come into play when dealing with the murder investigation of a reporter? Joining us now to discuss and spell it all out for us, attorney Matt Hoffmann with Battle-Born Injury Lawyers, and good afternoon to you. Good afternoon. So this is a really important topic, and we want to know, does the can't talk this morning. Can the Review-Journal that has been fighting to protect the contents of Jeff Garriman's phone do so under Nevada's Shiled law, and how does it really apply here?
And that's the big question, because we're talking about a journalist who's deceased, not a retired journalist, not a living journalist, and the journalist himself was murdered. So Nevada's Shiled law, it is the most protective law for journalists and their confidential sources and materials in the country. No state has a stronger law than Nevada's Shiled law. And it's not by coincidence that it came about in the late 1960s, because in the late 1960s, the federal government was cracking down on the mafia and organized crime essentially built this city. And to protect journalists and their confidential sources, the legislature passed the Shiled law, and it makes it so that a journalist never has to give up their confidential sources. Even in a court proceeding, any court proceeding, they don't have to give it up. And in fact, Jeff Garriman, ironically, expanded that law through his testimony at a mafia criminal trial here in Las Vegas, where he refused to divulge his sources. And you would go to jail for that in a lot of states and in federal court. But here, the Shiled law was deemed to protect him and the content. So what we're looking at is, if it applies to journalists, it applies to former journalists. Does it apply to a journalist who is deceased? And what the Review-Journal is arguing is that, of course, it should apply, because the last thing we want to do, especially when you think about organized crime, is give an incentive to take out the journalist. If all of a sudden their confidential sources can be discovered because they're dead, well, that's a terrible loophole. And so that's really where the argument is on the Shiled law itself, is does it apply after a journalist is deceased? And that's what they're arguing in this motion against Metro.
And RJ is also saying that they want sanctions to be brought against Metro. What warrants that?
Yeah, the sanction argument deals with the fact that early on in the investigation, the Metro detectives apparently did not disclose the fact that they had reviewed Jeff Garriman's phone and possibly other devices early on in the investigation. So the Review-Journal is arguing they lied to the court, they violated the law, and they should be sanctioned for it. Now, the police do have, I think, a compelling argument in this case, which is we're trying to solve a murder. And so we needed to look at anything we could get our hands on to discover, who did this. And for that reason, I don't know that sanctions will be levied, but I think the bigger picture here is expanding the Shiled law to apply to deceased journalists. And, as far as Metro, we'll have to see. But I guess my question to them would be, you knew early on that Robert Tellis was the #1 suspect. And I mean really early on. How much did you review of Jeff Garriman's phone? And did you go beyond anything that dealt with Robert Tellis? And that's going to be the question. If they did, maybe they will be sanctioned. But it's a big issue. And I think that the Review-Journal is doing the right thing here in trying to expand the Shiled law to protect journalists. Because, again, we don't want people, a loophole where if you kill the journalist, we can figure out their sources. People can get fired. They can get killed. We want the free flow of information to the public, and we want confidential sources to come forward so we can end, corruption and things like that.
Okay, it's a very interesting topic, because you can also see why police would say, well, we're also trying to solve a murder if that is,
Absolutely.
in fact, what they were after when they were going through that material, solely just trying to figure out who did it. So we'll have to keep abreast of this situation. Of course, we know you will help us do that. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.